Over the past few years, Europa Universalis 4 has seen some massive changes when it comes to the estates, as well as some added privileges and some new metas that we're going to be discussing today. So whether you're a new player to EU4 or you're an experienced tutorial achiever, meaning you've got at least 2,000 hours in the game, you definitely need to watch this video to become an actual EU4 master and learn how to properly manage your estates. If we get 5,000 likes on this video, I'm also going to be doing a brand new economy guide to help you manage and acquire tons and tons of ducats. The amount of estates that you get in EU4 depends from nation to nation, and that is based off of the region they're a part, in some cases the religion that they have, or just flat out unique estates for certain countries. That being said, I'm going to be showing first and foremost the standard estates, meaning the clergy, nobility, and burghers, and then afterwards we're going to go ahead and explain the rest of the more specialized estates as well. To give a brief explanation of the estate screen, we have right here the estate land. Altogether it should be 100% divided between the groundlands, that is the actual land owned by you, namely the king, and then you have the lands owned by the clergy, the nobility, and the burghers. Now, said ownership does give some loyalty equilibrium, but at the same time, the more land owned by the estates, the more debuffs that you get. Shown over here, the effects. So ideally, as you progress in the campaign, you want to be reaching 100% crownlands owned by the crown, you, and 0% owned by any of the other estates. There are some exceptions to this that we will be discussing in this video later down the line. Next up is the crownland screen. Now we have three interactions here. Seize crownlands, fairly easy to understand. You get 5% estate land for the crown, and this gets deducted from the other estates. There are some exceptions to this. For example, because the English start with the English villeinage privilege, the nobility does not lose any crownlands until you get rid of this unique privilege that the English start with. I have a video on this in which I get rid of this privilege in a month, so check the description below. I'm sure you guys are gonna really like that because I've seen people really struggle getting rid of this particular privilege. Next, we have summoning the diet. Now the diet gives you certain agendas proposed by the various estates, so in our case the clergy, the nobility, the burghers. However, there can be other estates that would propose certain agendas depending on what estates you have available. Doing these missions will give you temporary bonuses. For example, here the nobility lets you get a subjugation CB on Kildare for 20 years. In return, after you've done that mission, you get +1 Diplo reputation. Doing any of the three missions gives you 10% loyalty for that particular estate in general. The third interaction is sale of titles. Essentially, you get a flat amount of ducats, but you sell 10% of your crownlands to the other estates, meaning the estates share amongst each other the land that you sell to them, and you also get 10% flat loyalty. This is instantly achieved when you do sell the titles. We also have the effects over here, so I'm just going to quickly sell as an example this. When you go below 20%, 20 or below percentage of crownlands, you start getting some debuffs. Namely, you get national tax modifier reduction, max absolutism reduction, and liberty from subject development reduction, and you also get autonomy increase if your crownlands is really low, below 20%. So let's give an example here. We'll give a privilege, and there you go. Now we're getting 0 + 1 monthly autonomy in your provinces. If we hover over the autonomy screen here, we can see that represented on the bottom left. For every little bit of autonomy that gets increased, so let's just show that off, you do get some debuffs. At 100% autonomy, you basically get almost no manpower and no income from that particular province. So it's basically kind of the same like not even owning that province, meaning you want to keep your autonomy as close to 0 as possible. So out of all these debuffs, the only one that actually makes any difference is the autonomy change, which is why you want to at least keep your crownlands at 20% in the early phase of the campaign. Another really vital part about the estate screen is understanding the difference between loyalty, influence, and the various bonuses that you get from the estates. Essentially, the loyalty that you have represents how happy that particular estate is with you. The influence represents how influential they are and how many bonuses, and this has a couple of added effects. For example, the higher the influence that an estate has, the less crownlands you will be taking from provinces when you've annexed them. The lower the influence, the more crownlands that you take for yourself when you annexed enemy provinces. Also, you need to at least have a little bit of a higher influence and loyalty to get more bonuses. So let's say we're gonna give give out the oversight by the clergy here, which increases our influence by 10%. Church sanctuaries. I'm only giving this, by the way, just to increase my influence and my equilibrium for the loyalty. So you guys get the idea behind this. There you go. We're up to 15% national tax after we've increased our influence. So there are certain bonuses to also having your influence a little bit higher, not only drawbacks. Now say we're also going to sell titles and we're instantly going to get 10% loyalty. That means we got some massive bonuses. We got 20% national tax modifier, stability costs, and yearly papal influence +1 flat. Take note, if we hover over the loyalty, we have something called the equilibrium. What does that mean? Essentially, the equilibrium is the percentage at which your loyalty is going to be ticking towards. So if your loyalty is 60 and your equilibrium is 63.8, then your loyalty is going to increase until it reaches 63.8. If your loyalty is 60 but your equilibrium is 35.5, then it's going to start ticking down until it reaches 35.5, and it's going to stay at that particular number. The best way to increase your loyalty equilibrium is to give out privileges, but of course there's other ways. If we hover over here, we see that legitimacy increases your loyalty equilibrium, nobility, land ownership. So land ownership in general increases the equilibrium for loyalty. Prestige in fact affects all three of these states. However, army tradition only affects the nobility. You can get up to 5% extra equilibrium from army tradition. You also can get 10% burgher loyalty equilibrium from having 100 mercantilism, and you also get another 5% loyalty equilibrium for the clergy from having 100% unity. So if your entire country is converted to your primary religion, your state religion, aside from the sale of titles, which instantly gives you the 10% loyalty, there's other ways of getting instant loyalty. Obviously, as I said before, completing the agenda instantly, and there's also missions, there's also events, there's a few other ways that you can increase your loyalty instantly, but you really just want to make sure that you have your equilibrium as high as possible at all times, especially in the early part of the campaign. So now that we understand the screen better, how are we going to distribute our privileges? Well, first and foremost, it is a little bit RNG and it does depend on each nation itself, but as a general note, you pretty much always want to give the +1 mana privilege for all three of the estates. Now take note, this will take away most of your crownlands. The Bohemians are special because they start with 35% crownlands. Most nations start with 30 or less in certain nations' cases. I think the papal state starts with significantly more as well, like 40 something percent crownlands, that is. So it does vary from nation to nation. The standard, let's say, is 30%. Whatever the case, after you've given out the +1 mana privileges, make sure you seize crownlands. Remember that every time you seize crownlands, if you have below 50% loyalty with your estates, there is a chance that you will get rebels from that particular estate. When those rebels trigger, it is also a chance that they're going to increase the crownlands for that particular estate, depending on the rebels and depending on the lands that they take. Whenever they take provinces, whenever they finish sieging down provinces, that is. So make sure you wipe out those rebels before they manage to siege anything down. Let's tag in quickly to Austria because they have exactly 30% crownlands. So after we give the privilege and we seize down afterwards, we're ending up with 0.2 monthly autonomy change, which is really not good because that means that we're essentially going to be getting increased autonomy every month. So we have to increase our crownlands ASAP. Aside from seizing the crownlands, the easiest other way is to just grab lands from another country. Now, if you are a bigger nation yourself, it is recommended that you give no other privileges, only these 3 privileges. Then you have an initial war. So I'm just gonna quickly bake a war here. And in that war, once you've successfully managed to win the war and you've gotten all the provinces you want to take from them, the amount of provinces that you take will also change your crownlands. So if we scroll down, it's actually going to tell you how much each of the estates is going to lose crownlands. So we see here clergy, nobility, and burghers are losing 2.7, 3.7, and 1.1. So that means that is an added plus that you're going to be getting. That is also, as I said before, determined by the influence of each of these estates. If you've got more influence for the estates, so let's just give out quickly some privileges to increase our influence for the estates. Look at that. The difference is massive. So now we're losing significantly less crownland ownership for clergy and nobility. However, the burghers are gaining crownlands. So they went from losing a lot of crownlands to actually gaining crownlands, which goes to show having higher influence is not great, especially if you're trying to increase your crownlands. So the strat usually is, if you are a bigger nation, give out the +1 mana privilege. Don't give any other privileges. Attack whoever you want to be attacking in the early part of the campaign. Take their crownlands, and after you've taken and you've gained more crownlands, crownlands as consequence. Because of the higher influence as the Austrians here, we only gained 4.5, but we could significantly gain more. We could have been at 15-16% if we had lesser influence as we had earlier. After you've reached 10% or above, then you're getting less autonomy change debuff, and then once you're at 20%, you're getting no autonomy change debuff. So this particular bit here makes no difference really. We can also just develop provinces to get crownlands. Remember that every single dev click equals to 0.2% crownlands increase. So developing this 3 times, let me get some mana points in here, means I got 10% crownlands, 10.094. so that means we're only getting 0.10 autonomy change monthly, which is actually bearable, because whenever you're at peace, that means you're technically not gaining any autonomy increase. You're only gaining that whenever you're at war. So that's why you want to go up to 20% ASAP. A notable difference when it comes down to it is for one province miners. Even if you give the +1 mana privilege and you end up with literally 0 crownlands or 5% or whatever the case, these debuffs don't really affect you. So let's break this down a little bit, shall we? Monthly autonomy change plus 0.2. Well, you only have one province, and in your capital province, which is your only province, you cannot go above 0% autonomy. So that means that debuff quite literally does not affect us at all. It's impossible to go above 0. Next up, we have the national tax minus 15%. Once we give the rest of the privileges, this is going to be plus 15, so it's going to end up negating itself, ending up with 0%, so not actually any debuff. The maximum absolutism minus 30%. Doesn't matter because absolutism actually triggers in the 1600s, so that's 200 years away. Liberty desire from subject development plus 100 is actually very, very little. In fact, this is so little, it's not even going to increase liberty desire for subjects for more than even just like 5-6% in most cases, which you can negate by just developing their province once or placating them or something of the sort. But giving this out for one province minor nations is the best thing you can do. And I'm saying this because I've seen some people give some really bad advice saying that you should not give this one province minor nations, which is literally the opposite of what you should be doing. So trust me on this. This is a no-brainer. You basically get 1 power from each category for the rest of the campaign from day 1, which is a massive amount, guys. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about what privileges we should be giving each of the estates. So for the standard ones, of course, you want to give the religious diplomats always, because it offers a diplo reputation +1 alongside giving you 10 relations with other nations within your own religious group. In the case of the Catholics, that's basically all of Europe is going to get +10 relations with you. Giving the advisor cost reduction privilege is really great. However, make sure you do this whenever you can afford advisors and you already have advisors, and make sure you do this after you've gotten at least 1 stability, because this will start increasing your stability stab up costs by 10% each. That's going to be +30 stability cost increase from giving it to all 3 of the estates, because you do want to give it to all 3 of the estates eventually. Getting 1 stability is vital in order to start getting prosperity in your lands. You need to have 1 stability as a minimum for this to start to go up, and once it does reach maximum, you get autonomy change reduction in that state, as well as dev cost reduction and goods produced +25. So it is a really great modifier to have in all of your states. Oversight by the clergy, together with right of council and free enterprises, is quite literally bait. Do not give them. They don't give anything except for loyalty and influence. So there are exceptions, obviously, if you really need to increase your loyalty equilibrium above 50, because generally speaking, you want to make sure that your equilibrium is at least 50% or higher. So by default, it starts going back up to 50 every time you start seizing the crownlands. However, in most cases, you can actually get it up to 50 equilibrium without having to give all 3 of those estates. And giving those out is literally just a waste of an estate slot, which you could use for another way better estate down the line, not necessarily from the start of the campaign. Expansion of zealotry is actually really underrated in my opinion. It offers 5% morale of armies when fighting heretics or heathens. However, this is great to give when you're at the fringes of your religious group. So it's great, for example, for the Byzantines because they're fighting against Muslims or Catholics. It's great for the Coptics because they're fighting everybody else that's not Coptic, so that's literally everybody around them, around the world really. But if you're a Catholic nation and a sea of Catholics, then this is actually a debuff because it offers -5 morale of armies when fighting with your own religions. Religious culture could be good, especially if you're trying to convert everybody to your religion, because it offers culture conversion cost -10% for provinces that are not of your particular culture, and also you get some tax modifier, production efficiency, and so on, your accepted cultures in your primary culture, so that's really good. But this is something you want to give out later in the campaign when you really are struggling with a massive empire that needs to be converted to the right culture / religion. Something that I found to be extremely useful, especially the earlier you get it the better, is the clerical educations, which can offer up to 25 reform progress growth at 60 or above loyalty, and it can be minus reform progress growth if it's below 30 loyalty. So make sure you don't have any of your estates below 30 loyalty, because that's when it starts to get nasty. And this goes hand in hand with grand court positions, basically works the same way for the nobility, and allow economic freedom for the burghers. Exactly same situation, different bonuses. This one gives merchant trade power, provincial trade power as well. The nobility one offers prestige DK. So you want to give these out alongside the +1 mana privilege, but give these out because they do increase your influence after you've gotten your lands. If you're a bigger nation, make sure you expand first to increase your crown lands. If you're a one province minor, it doesn't matter. You can literally give this out from day one. The governing capacity plus 100% can be offered for all of the estates. So if you have 5 estates, you could potentially get plus 500 governing capacity, as certain nations have, for example, in the Middle East and in the Indian parts. They do take 5% crown lands, so you want to offer this up later down when you do have the crown lands available to offer for the estates, of course. And it does give 5% loyalty equilibrium and 5% influence, so it's actually not really bad. Do take note, you can have up to 6 privileges by default for each of the estates, but this can be increased from certain government reforms or from certain national ideas or from certain missions and so on. So it is a little bit different from nation to nation with the current patch. For the nobility is where it gets a little bit trickier, because there's a lot of privileges that are really great. I mean, I would offer 10 privileges if I had the option for the nobility, but unfortunately we're limited to 6. So some of the best ones you can offer are this one, nobility in the officer corps. It does require that you have at least 30 army tradition, and it will cost, so you will lose 5 army tradition when you give this privilege out, but it's going to lower your tradition DK by 0.5%, and it also makes recruiting generals 10% cheaper, so that's 5 mana points per general. That's really not bad. Increased levies, no brainer once more. Now this scales with the amount of crown lands that the nobility estate has. So that means if your nobility estate has 50% crown lands, then you're gonna get like 25% extra national manpower modifier, right? But if they have 0%, then you're gonna get nothing. So make sure that if you give this out, you do have some nobility crown land share that makes it worth it. I would say 10 to 15% or above is worth it. Like I mentioned before, the advisor cost really great. Make sure you do give it afterwards though. Supremacy over the council. Early in the campaign, you probably want to give this out because it does increase the loyalty equilibrium for all 3 of the estates, or as many estates as you might have, as well as it increases the influence. So there you go. Because the influence got increased, we went up to 15% manpower recovery and 15% national tax rather than 10%, which is what we had before. And our clergy is almost at 50% equilibrium. If we were to give out this particular privilege, we would be at 54%. Same goes for the burghers. We already have 52% loyalty equilibrium, so we don't need to worry about anything else because of the supremacy over the council. In certain cases, if you really don't want to waste your mana points or you're short on mana points, it also can be pretty worth it to give the nobility officer rights early in the campaign. You get a decent general with 40 tradition, so that can be a pretty good general actually if you're lucky, or if you reload the game enough times, right? So just to illustrate, once you click this, it's going to appear as a decision here. You click that decision, you do lose 10 loyalty, so keep that in mind. But let's see, we got a 4 fire, 1 shock, 3 maneuver. He's not bad. He's average. I'd say he's actually quite decent. Better than what you would probably get from just recruiting if you had the mana points separately. And of course, as always, when you do have the extra crown lands, give the plus 100 governing capacity. And this is a point in case here. We gave out 6 out of 6 privileges, and there would be space for more, like the army tradition one that I didn't give out yet. So if you were to prioritize, I would give the army tradition one instead of the nobility officer rights any day. Now for the burghers, this is where you can make a big ton of money. Of course, governing capacity, if you have the crown lands. Patronage of the arts is really good because you can get a bit of prestige from it, and you also get a flat yearly amount of prestige. Now the prestige that you get can be increased the more prestige you actually have. So if we were to drop our prestige by, say, scornfully insulting some nations, well, actually I cannot do that twice. Can I actually do prestige minus something? Is that a thing? It is. Okay, so now because we have -1 prestige, we go back to our burgers, and instead of 15 we get 20 prestige. Now if we were to be below 50, so let's say -100, then we refresh this and it's going to be a 30 prestige. Below 50 gives you 30. Okay, so you can really catch up with prestige. If you had a pretty rough war and you lost a lot of prestige, it can be worth giving out this particular privilege. Another really great privilege early on in the campaign is the indebted to the burgers. This will give you 1% loans. That means it's going to essentially be close to nothing in interest, 0.02 interest, and we managed to get a little bit of money early on to help us with some of our initial wars. Control over monetary policy is bait. It's actually bait. Do not give this out. All power costs plus 5%, especially early in the campaign, is dreadful. That's going to put you back a lot more than you can imagine, because all power cost means every single interaction that costs mana points is going to be 5% more expensive. But just 5% production and inflation reduction, it's not worth it at all. At all. Burger financial demand is also really good. It offers 10% national tax modifier from the early part of the campaign, and that's when tax shines, because as we all know, tax is where you're going to get most of your money from the early bit. Then you're going to switch over to trade and production income as you progress in the campaign when tax doesn't have any more relevancy. That being said, you also can ask for burger contribution, which is going to give construction cost reduction and naval maintenance reduction. So when you start building up a lot of buildings, you really want to click this, because 7% reduction for like 20 buildings or something that you're going to be building is actually a ton of money. Last one here, promote burger bookkeeping. It does scale with the amount of loyalty, and it offers some pretty good bonuses actually. If you have an extra slot available, give this out. It's not a massive one, but do give it out if you have the extra slot, that is for sure. Now that we've done that, we managed to reach 100 influence with one of our estates. Whenever any of your estates reaches 100 influence, it will trigger a national disaster. So if we go over to our stability and expansion tab, we see a plutocratic coup. Now this will start to slowly tick up. The only thing that will stop this is if you have loyalty for your burgers above 60, or if you have below 100 influence. So if you bring this down to 99, it stops the coup. If you bring it up to 60 loyalty, it stops the coup again. Honestly, fairly easy to stop the queue and reset it every once in a while if you really need to, or just be careful and not reach 100 influence if you really are too worried about it. When it comes to hordes, the tribal estates are fairly straightforward, to be fair. You want to give out the tribal land rights whenever you're struggling with governing capacity, which is likely not going to be at the start, so that's probably going to be later down the line. Autonomy for chieftains is pretty much bait. Don't give that out. You want to use up your tribal slots for other privileges, such as the guaranteed leadership of the host, which offers the tradition decay reduction. So whenever you have the army tradition, give this out. You need 30 for that though. Manpower, give it out from the very beginning. Tribes need as much manpower as possible to do those world conquests that we all know we want to do. Religious unity increase from the autonomy of the tribes, also pretty good, especially since you're going to be struggling with doing your world conquest. You're probably going to have 1, maybe 2 missionaries as the starting tribal religions. However, if you convert to Sunni or one of the Catholics, you're probably going to get more from Defender of the Faith, from monuments and so on. So at the start, depending on the tribe, it is worth it. You can obviously revoke it later down the line. Tribal freedom of the steppes, not worth it, because you just get development cost and you're not going to be playing tall as the tribes. Military service is actually pretty good because it gives you the contribute warriors and the race host decisions. The race host essentially gives you 5 free cavalry units, and you can get this from day 1. And not only can you get it from day 1, but they are built in 25% of the time. So within just a couple of months, you're going to get the 5 units finished building, and then you can use them in your initial conquest. Plus the contribute warriors also lowers the maintenance and increases the reinforcement speed, so they work hand in hand. These are privileges that did not exist before, so that's why I updated my estates video in the first place. There's a lot of new privileges that are great that should be highlighted obviously for the other estates. I also like to give out the secure succession, so whenever your leader dies, you don't have to go through the whole civil war and everything every single time. This way, as long as your heir has enough mana points, it's going to be a smooth transition with no rebels to be fighting. Now for the Muslims, you're going to have access to the Dhimmi estates, and there's some pretty good privileges here. Obviously, you want to give out the 100 governing capacity whenever you have the crownlands available, so later down the line, because you still have the initial 3 privileges you're going to prioritize before the Dhimmis. Leader without upkeep is pretty good at the start of the campaign. However, as you progress and you get more land force limit, you're going to get more free generals, because remember, the leader limit is tied directly to your naval naval and your land force limit. So the higher those are, the more you're going to be able to get for free. Max promoted cultures, not necessarily the greatest. Personally, I probably never gave this out. Demi liberties, unless you really need to get the loyalty equilibrium up to above 50, you can give it. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. Development of communities is good if you want to be playing toll. Promote Demi education is also good, but you can only give it once. So either you give it for the Demis or for the ulema. Religious unity can also be temporarily good, especially if you have issues with getting your religious unity up. Those are pretty much the only ones I personally would give out from the Demis. The great part about the Demis is if you have enough loyalty and influence for them, you also get technology cost reduction. So that can make a big difference in boosting up your tech before anybody else does. The Ottomans, as of a couple of patches ago, also have their unique Janissary privilege now. The Janissaries are actually really good privilege-wise at the start. However, the more privileges you give them, the harder it's going to be to revoke, and you might end up in a pretty bad situation in a mid to late campaign. The truth is, though, the disaster of the decadence that the Ottomans have, you pretty much have to go through it, because the result of going through that disaster is that you can westernize your nation, and as such you can get the best unit types that the Western military tech group has, but you have to go through the disaster. So personally, I like to just give out all the Janissary privileges that are good, albeit it's likely wiser not to give them out from the very beginning. Slowly start giving them out as you progress. One of the good ones is the standardized salaries, which allows you to pay the Janissaries less whenever the event comes up and you have to pay up. Loyalty to the Sultanate is also pretty good because it offers the loyalty equilibrium above 50 from the get-go. Personally, I like to start with just these two privileges, and then you're going to be forced to give some more out from events, or you're going to maybe take some, who knows, right? Another really good one is the strict Devershim system that offers an extra local 10% manpower and also increases the influence a little bit, so you can give that out as well. The bonus from the Janissaries increase the rebel suppression efficiency, and if you have enough loyalty and influence, you also will get army tradition decay reduction, which is again pretty significant. If you are an Eastern tech nation that has steppe provinces, then you're also going to get access to the Cossack units, which are really great. Cossack units and Cossack privileges are some of my personal favorite because they are really well rounded. So for example, obviously you get the plus 100 governing capacity, no brainer, but then check it out, we also have dev cost minus 15% in steppe provinces. That is actually extremely good. Highly recommend you give this out, but of course whenever you do have the crownlands, not at the start. Cossack self-governance not required because you will reach 50 loyalty equilibrium with the other privileges. Establish the Cossacks regiments is going to allow you to start recruiting Cossack units, and of course give this out. It also gives 15% shock damage for the Cossack regiments. This affects the whole army. Army tradition and leader shock are again really great. Manpower from steppe provinces again is super freaking good. Take note, it does lower the tax income, but as you know, tax income as you progress in the campaign is worth less and less. So if you really don't want to give it at the start, you can give it in the mid to late part of the campaign. Freedom of the steppe, do not give out because it's going to give minimum local autonomy plus 33. So this is literally bait. This is also a very underrated privilege in my opinion, the legalize the Cossacks raids, because you're going to get access to this particular national decision, which offers up to 20 army tradition. That is actually freaking massive, dude. Freaking imagine you start with 29 army tradition from day one of your campaign. That is insane. That is actually freaking insane. It also means that you can get the jousting tournament from the very first month if you outlive 4 enough times, to be fair. But like I said, there's so many good privileges with this that we already are up to 6 privileges. I wish I could give out 2 or 3 more in my, that would, if I could expand the Cossacks regiment as well, that would be perfect, really. So maybe you can take out one of the last 2 and expand the Cossacks regiment instead. Now for the Indians, there's some new estates. A lot of them are basically the same like the Western ones, and there's a few differences between the Islamic and the Hindu Indians. Some of the new juicy stuff here is the Brahmins, and they offer really great privileges like the legitimacy to rule, which offers religious unity and tolerance of heathens, which is good, since a lot of the times you're gonna have issues with different religions because there's this dynamic battle between Islam and Hinduism. So eventually a lot of provinces will get converted to Islam, or if you expand outside of India, you're gonna have to take Islamic or other religious provinces, and as such your unity will go down. No brainer to give out the 100 governing capacity as well. Guarantee Brahmin autonomy means that you will not be able to convert other religions to your religion. However, they also don't contribute to religious unity, so it's a give and take sort of situation. If you don't want to convert other religions, you can give this out. Brahmin education is basically the same like the clergy for the Western nations. Reform progress. The ulema is essentially the clergy, so you have like the clergy and a slightly different clergy, which is the Brahmins. The Rajputs are a unique Indian estate, and they offer some cool stuff like the ability to recruit the Rajput regiments, which offer morale of armies increase, reinforcement cost reduction, and drill loss reduction. You also can give them +1 military mana. However, if you give it to the Rajputs, you cannot also give it to the Amirs, so you have to choose between the two of them. For the right amount of army tradition, you can give the land fire damage +1 guaranteed for your generals, and you can get a general with 1 extra fire from this particular privilege. So if you have extra slots, definitely worth it. Similar to the previous estate, you can give the Grand Court position, which offers prestige decay, but you can only give it to 1, so it's either the Rajputs or the Amirs. And the other unique estate for the Indians is the Giants. They have some cool stuff like state maintenance and development cost reduction, which I really enjoy. You can give the burger privilege. Essentially, the Giants are the burghers with some extra privileges for Indians. The control over monetary policies, as always, not worth it. It's bait, boys. And the rest of the privileges are pretty much the same. Now, before we go on to the other special estates of Ming, I want to mention something. Namely, I want to talk a little bit about the monopolies. So when the game first came out, monopolies were actually pretty decent. Then they got nerfed. Now they got again nerfed. The reality is that if you have extra slots and you need the loyalty equilibrium, you could give out the monopolies. What they do is they give you ahead of time 8 years worth of production income, and they also give 1 mercantilism. You cannot revoke the privilege for 10 years, however, so you lose 2 years worth of production development, or better yet, production income. And it can be worth if you're not going to be expanding. So say for example you give monopoly on wine and you don't expand for the next 10 years, then it's fine. You're not really losing that much as long as you revoke the privilege afterwards and you have the extra privilege slots for it. However, if you give it out and then you plan on taking 8 provinces that have wine, those provinces you're literally getting 0 production income from for those 10 years after you've given the privilege, so you would be wasting out on a lot of income. Keep that in mind whenever you give out monopolies. It's very situational. It can be worth it as long as you're not expanding within areas that encompass those specific resources, and you have the extra slots and you have the ability to revoke them whenever you want. So you got more loyalty than influence. Because remember, to revoke privileges, you need to have more loyalty than influence for that particular estate, for all privileges. Some of them you have to do special decisions, which is a little bit more situational, of course. Now for Ming, we've got the eunuchs unique estate, and they start with the delegate subject diplomacy, which offers a buttload of corruption, but it lowers liberty, desire, and subjects. The truth is that the eunuchs are pretty much a debuff. I don't really see any of these as that amazing considering the amount of corruption that they add at the same time. And overall, you pretty much want to lower the influence of the eunuchs as much as possible in your campaign. They start with 59% of the crownlands owned, so that's pretty significant. Some of these are worth giving at the start though, and then just revoking them afterwards. Like for example, the eunuch land right is not bad if you need the governing capacity. Also, if the eunuch's crown distribution is 0, then you will not be getting the corruption. So some of these are great to give out when the eunuchs have little to no crownlands. So let me illustrate that a little bit by increasing my crownlands a tiny bit. So I'm going to increase my crownlands by just developing provinces. Every dev click is 0.2 crownlands. I actually don't know if there's any actual cheat to increase crownlands. Alright, we devved it to the point where we have pretty much no eunuch lands, and also the higher crownlands, the more bonuses you get. Look at that. We got monthly autonomy change reduction, absolutism increase yearly, and maxed out, as well as reform progress growth from just having high crownlands. But yeah, let's go back to the eunuchs now, because check it out. The governing capacity privilege does not give any corruption now. The advisor one doesn't give any corruption. Pretty much all of them give 0 corruption, but for some of them they also give 0 benefits because there's no crownlands distributed to the eunuchs. Some of these privileges depend on eunuchs getting crownlands. So when you do get rid of the crownlands for them, you can give, say for example, the advisor cost reduction privilege. Minimum autonomy one is pretty decent. Again, minimum autonomy and 100% governing capacity. Supremacy over the empress still does give corruption, so I don't recommend you give this out. Same goes for this one. However, 0.05 is actually tolerable, and it allows you to change national focus a little bit quicker, so it can be actually worth it. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the eunuchs, at least. I do hope this video was educational. Leave that like so we can get the other one done. And until the next one, take care of yourselves. And remember that you only have one life. Don't let it go to waste. Love you guys.